Hi there everybody, my name's Aubrey and I'm an opera singer and a voice coach. We're going to take a look today at Colleen Ballinger, but we're not going to be discussing her apology video. I think plenty of other people are doing a great job at doing that, so we're actually going to look at her performance on Broadway in the show Waitress. I think from the perspective of voice students, we can always look at live performances and take a lot from them, so that's what we're going to do today. So without wasting too much time, let's just jump in to Colleen Ballinger in Waitress.
Enthusiastically American, dynamic and witty. I am a woman of many passions, including a rare turtle collection.
I'm hearing a lot of Miranda.
I love the History Channel.
Now that's nice.
Note, I have played Betsy Ross in 33 Revolutionary War reenactments.
Okay, well that'll set you apart from the crowd.
Yeah. I'm calling myself New Dawn Rising.
Don't post it tonight.
Oh no, this is a mistake, Dawn!
So let's take a look at this already. Just preemptively, one of the things that I'm noticing is that she's given Dawn, who is this particular character, a voice that sounds very similar to her character Miranda. And something that's tricky about that is I can't help but hear Miranda's confidence, aggression, those kinds of feelings when I hear that voice. And in the show, from what I understand, Dawn should be a little bit more shy. Fundamentally, it's neither good nor bad. I think it's just important to note that. So let's continue.
And only one asking real things, usually facts and figures. When information's in its place, I analyze the guessing game. Guess what? What? I don't like guessing games or when I feel things before I know the feelings. How am I supposed to operate if I'm just tossed around by fate? But on an unexpected date, the stranger whom I took too fast, or ask me questions about myself before I decided that he could ask me questions about myself if I took too close, or call the waiter by his first name, or even burritos, but eat the cookie before the cream of what scares me the most, what scares me the most.
Let's pause there, right before we get into the bigger stuff. So I just want to point out the level of nasality she has. It's also a specific kind of nasality where air is hemorrhaging out, and as a result, it's causing her to sound a little breathless. So as singers, we want to definitely play with different colors for characterization. It makes things more interesting for us to watch as audience members, but when we're playing on a stage, we do have to be careful of certain things. One of them being demonstrated here is placement. So here, I would tell her, instead of just putting the air through the nose and letting it move through naturally, I would definitely place it a little bit more along the nasopharyngeal palate, right back there. So it'd feel like I'm almost pushing it up and into a tighter space so that I can get a nice bright nasal sound if that's what you're looking for the character, but it's not as wasteful when it comes to air. So instead of thinking like this and placing it through the nose and you can kind of hear it's a little airy and breathy, instead I would place it up here and make it a little bit tighter and not waste so much air. That way I can actually manage a lot more of my breath shaping and feel like I'm not losing control of the line by the end of it. So a way that I kind of find that space is thinking of the word ew. 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 And you can hear it's very bright. That way I can still retain that color if I'm looking for a nasal shape without feeling like I'm going to be running out of breath every time I'm saying something and preparing to sing the next line. The next part that sticks out for me is that word date. Unexpected date just goes so wide. You can see a lot of her teeth. Unexpected date. And it almost feels like she's really pushing it out there. As a result, it does not fit with the rest of the line. It just kind of punches out and you're like, whoa, where did that come from? So when we're thinking about these lines in terms of shaping, don't just jump to that big note because you know it's supposed to be bigger than the rest of it. Think about how to get there. Think about crescendoing into it a little bit more gently and decrescendoing out of it so that everything is just more cohesive. Because right now it's feeling disconnected. The vowel is also very tight. Something I talk about all the time is adding a bit of a schwa there. The schwa, as a reminder, is the sound of just a neutral and I place that sound in a lot of vowels because it helps to warm it up and give me more space to resonate. Here, it's very, very forward. It almost feels like a wall of sound instead of feeling like it's more lifted and pillar-like in the back. I don't hate the idea of separating that diphthong, date, right there, but I would still ask her to make it a lot warmer. I also think it's going to help her feel more confident in that particular area of the voice. We can run the risk of over-singing very easily when we're belting. So we always want to take into consideration our maximum volume and pull it back. I like to tell people, think about running at about 70% power. That way you still have a buffer of about 30% left in case you do need to go a little further. But if you're singing max volume, you really have nowhere else to go. So you run the risk of just sounding kind of stagnant, which I think happens even on that little note. It just kind of hits it and she stays. I would love to see it blossom a little bit more and her handling it with a little bit more grace. Although the performance is cute and it's staged really well, it can be hard for me to hear exactly what she's saying in those narrative chunks. She's taking very audible breaths in, and that gasping is distracting me a little bit. I would tell her to carefully plan out where she's going to be breathing so that she doesn't feel as rushed. Every once in a while, it feels like that breath is something she needs to take instead of something that she's planned out. It could be from nervousy, it could be from extra motion, but something that I always warn singers about is live performance can be a surprise once you get on stage in terms of motion per exhaustion. Really, really carefully plan out how you're going to move, how much you're going to move, and how much breath you need in order to sustain the vocal line. Because if you end up moving too much, you might end up sacrificing voice quality.
But eat the cookie before the cake. What scares me the most? What scares me the most is what if he sees me? What if he doesn't like it? What if he runs the other way? Now can't hide there. What happens there? What if he knows me? He's only disappointed. What if I give myself away? Only get you back.
All right, let's pause about this here too. Interesting. I like that she's standing and singing, she's taking over the stage. However, it's chronically a little bit flat. And there's a couple reasons why that could be. Number one, we're going back to the idea of shape. I think the vowel she's singing is a bit funky for this area of the voice. I like to tell people when you're learning about belting and where to place it, think about your teeth, right? Don't show too much teeth. Way! She had a lot of teeth there. So I like to think you can have a little bit of front teeth. I mean, there's going to be a little bit showing. But the idea is way, way, instead of way, way. Do you hear how the brightness changes? It's not a huge shape change. It's not a lot of effort for me to change the vowel, but man, does it change the color. And as a result, I have a little bit more lift and a little bit more of that pillar shape that I talked about. Way! And that shape blends a little bit better with our lower voice, making the transition up to that high belt a little bit easier for us. We're not worried as much about changing gears. Whereas if I were to change that mouth shape all of a sudden on that note, which she is doing here, it just doesn't sound as connected. And it also feels like she kind of shifts a little bit in order to hit that note. I would want her to feel more like she's on a runway, taking off, hitting the note, and then returning back. She's also breathing in a lot of spots. I'm kind of worried that she's not planned out her breaths, or she's moved a little bit too much and now she's feeling the need to take breaths all the time. You'll notice that they happen at points in the phrase that don't really make as much sense in a sentence. Like if I were to speak the sentence to you, when you're going through a piece yourself, make sure that you're thinking about the line. If it does not make sense when I'm speaking it, then it's probably not going to make as much sense singing it either. So I would tell her, speak through it, notice where there's commas or natural breaks in the line, and try and place your breaths there rather than anywhere you can get them, because it does feel like she doesn't have as much control over her breath support, which ends up being audible to us in the form of those pretty heavy breaths. So how do we fix some of these shapings? I would say starts with the word what if, right? What if those are kind of naturally a little bit tight in my mouth. So I have to think about placing them already in a spot that's going to be very vertical, very relaxed, very neutral. That way I can already be ready for that high note. What if, instead of what if, where I place it to the nose. And that's a little bit operatic, but the idea is still the same. You can lose some of that vibrato and make it sound a little bit softer. What if, instead of what if. That secondary sound that I'm making is just going to set us up for a slightly tight, reached sound. And that's really tricky. And you can kind of hear it already, where she feels like she's kind of going for the note. I want her to feel like she's going over the note. The way I describe this to my students is finding the lowest common denominator space. And what I mean by that is going through and trying to isolate what the hardest part of your song is. Looking at that, examining that, and finding a breath support and a vowel shape and a color overarchingly that sounds good in that hard spot. And you take those techniques that you worked on in that hard part and use them as the baseline for the surrounding textures as well. That way you're not doing as much to change and modify. You're already in a space that feels good to start off with. You hit the hard part and then you return back and it all sounds very uniform. If you already feel like you're using a good vowel, then singing the rest of the phrase is going to be a piece of cake, or in the case of this musical, a piece of pie. That flatness becomes really noticeable when she sings. What happens then? It's just too wide and too throaty. It's just a little bit like she's manhandling her way through it, and I would tell her to really focus on relaxing and lifting in the back. You do not want to feel like you're pushing your way through that note, because in the case of performing in Broadway, you might be performing this regularly throughout the week, and you want to be able to do something that's sustainable. Fundamentally, you should have everything feeling kind of similar in the mouth. That way you're not moving as much. Less movement, more ease. Let's go.
I'm just fine, I should shake hands with I get the best of you. So that when he sees me, I want to.
Dawn, you seem a little, just a tad bit.
I'm not defensive. I was simply being cautious. I can't risk reckless stating due to my miscalculating why. A certain suitor stands in line. I've seen movies, those things for television. You cannot be too careful when it comes to sharing the ride. I put it up a miserable life. Oh, sorry, girls.
Let's take a look at that. So as you can see, I already mentioned it's sounding very breathless. She's moving around a lot. We're returning back to that Miranda sound as well. So I'm just having some trouble hearing some of the words. I really wish that it was a little clearer and that her accent that she's using for the character wasn't taking away from the funny narrative aspects to the song. With the passage that starts low and ascends into wife, we want to think again about shape here. I don't hate that she's being very expressive down in that low range, but she has to be careful not to separate the low from the mid to the high, because it does feel like she's shifting gears each time she's entering a new area of her voice. I would tell her really think about placing that low range in a bit more of a smile so that it feels more akin to the middle range and making that transition thusly a little bit smoother. When she sings wife, I can hear a lot of that accent coming through, and it ends up kind of making it sound tight and pushed. So instead of doing wah, where you see a lot of teeth, I would tell her to think more vertical. Wah, wah, instead of wah, wah, because you can hear there's an extra brightness that we really don't need, and it's not going to add anything to the experience on that belt. And we can replace it with a warmer, fuller, more easily sustainable sound. The other thing is, it doesn't really take away from the accent. If you do want that accent, you can still have it, but always remember to make sure that you're not sacrificing the quality of the singing for your comedic voice work.
But it could be criminal! Some sort of psychopath who escaped from an institution somewhere where they don't have girls. He could have masterminded some way to find me. He could be colorblind.
She's moving so much.
Means that he could be less than kind, or even worse, he could be very, very oblivious. Make me laugh.
So little bit about the ending. Overarchingly, it's not a terrible performance, but there's a lot of little things that I think would really help her feel more confident on stage and give the audience a much more cohesive experience of this song. As I brought up before, and even while I was listening, it was so difficult for me to not hear those breaths. They were happening all the time, all over the place, and in the middle of lines that I really wasn't expecting to hear a breath. So, be warned, when you have to do blocking, which is the motion on stage, just be aware of how much breathing that's going to require you to do. And make sure that you're compensating for that so that you don't end up sacrificing the quality of your singing. In that moment around like 3 minutes, 14 seconds in the video, it gets so soft, so quiet. I can't hear what she's saying very well. And it's possible that it's the recording, but it's also just a sudden stop. So when you want to be quiet, but you're still trying to fill up a room, I always tell people, go for placing it almost like in a pyramid shape. So instead of going soft and whispery like she did, place it a little bit more like this. You kind of lift it in the forward part of your face, right by your sinuses, and you can place it in that spot, and you can start adding a lot of color to the voice, but it's softer. When she returns back and everybody's dancing, she sings that phrase, opens up a door, and it kind of feels disconnected. It almost feels like she might have gotten close to a crack. Make sure that even though we're at the climax of this song, we're not giving too much. Always remember, 70% power, so you have space. And just in case, when you're excited and at the final part of your show and it's going great, you still have a 30% space for you to be like overexcited without ending up with a crack. Playing around with vowels, you can make that dar a bit more round and a little bit more open so that belt feels better. There's a bunch of these little tiny things that are getting in the way and kind of like reminds me that this is a show instead of like giving me that suspension of disbelief. Right at that true final point at wants to again, it sounds like she's not feeling as secure as she could. But it's a held note, and it's going to be there for a while. So whenever we're faced with a held, long, belty note, make sure you really practice where the vowel needs to be and how much air you need to make it from point A to point B. Going back to what we talked about earlier, right, regarding the teeth, a way that I can trick myself into thinking a little bit more round when I'm doing a belt is to think about soft lips, making my lips feel nice and soft instead of feeling tight or puckered or pulled. So instead of wants to again, where the lips are kind of pulled back, I would think more about soft lips. Wants to again. By adding that little extra plushness and softness to my lips, I end up being able to hold straight tone, or I can add a little bit of that vibrato just to change it up and make it yours. Even though a lot of people will probably sing this role in the future and already have in the past, does not mean that we have to sound exactly like everybody else, but you don't want to end up putting yourself in a position where you're remembered for negative qualities of your voice. It's tricky because a lot of people remember the high notes, the fancy notes, the hard stuff, or the final moment of the song rather than the whole piece. I think there's quite a few things that Colleen probably could have worked on while she was going through rehearsals in order to make this sound a little bit smoother. I think the final question that people have regarding this show is if it's Broadway quality. And I'm not going to actually answer that question because fundamentally it doesn't matter what my opinion is because she ended up doing the show. But I would encourage people to always challenge themselves by listening to many different singers and learn a little bit about different practiced techniques that all these different performers use and figure out for yourself what qualities you like in a voice and what kinds of performances you enjoy as an audience member, because these are the things that actually really matter and allow you, as the audience here on YouTube, to become a better critic. My goal is to provide content that all of my viewers can use as learning materials. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this little breakdown. If you guys have anything that you want to discuss in particular regarding this performance, feel free to leave a comment down below. I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video, and as always, keep on singing.